Hello, I'm Jonathan Douglas, and in this Art Smart video series I'm going to be discussing my paintings and the artists and art of the past which have influenced me. Along the way we'll learn about composition, art technique, and art history. In the process we will become art smart. Andy Warhol was known for revolutionizing the art world with his pop art, but his fashion sense was equally iconic. Beyond his artistic innovations, Warhol's shoes were a canvas for his personal style and a reflection of his artistic vision. What did shoes mean for Andy Warhol, and what do Andy Warhol's shoes mean for us today? This question has been answered in a very puerile manner by some critics who have seen his work as representing the foot fetish in the modern sense. When he painted Elvis's boots, he also painted one of the first transgender people, and he painted the shoes different sizes and from an odd perspective to sort of indicate the disparity in their cultural status. But I would take this further and say that just as shoes factor so heavily into our language when we say things like, "Let me take this a step further," or "walk a mile in a person's shoes," or "if the shoe fits, wear it," all of these turns of phrase, shoes represent a barrier, a liminality between the material world and our personal lives. And I think that all of the years that Andy Warhol spent working in the advertising industry in the 1950s would have instilled in him that importance of shoes as a symbol for the individual. And individuality is a concept which can't be overstated when referring to the work of Andy Warhol and later of Jean-Michel Basquiat. In the 1950s, conservative, heteronormative standards were so rigid and such an instilled part of traditionalist values that would have said that the individual should be suppressed and the individual should be marginalized and the individual, the LGBTQ, the individual should be ostracized from society in a way. And maybe in some sense the shoe represents that, because artists and individuals and free thinkers are the mud which the shoe can keep from society. And I wonder if maybe Andy Warhol didn't understand shoes in that way, as something that protects the delicate feet of conventional society from the mud of the artist. And I was somewhat dismissive of him. I thought he was an icon of the 1960s and that he really had no importance in modern society. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I decided that I would do more studying and investigating into the life of Andy Warhol. And the one thing that really stood out to me was the image of his expensive Italian shoes with paint on them. And that's something that I thought about for a long time, and I'm really only now coming to understand it fully. While I've never chosen of my own accord to feature shoes as a subject in a painting, I have occasionally done commissions of cowboy boots or military boots as like a memorial. And in that case it's a very conservative image that is in some ways diametrically opposed to the work that Andy Warhol did. But it's very similar to the advertising work that he did in the 1950s before his artistic career took off. So in that sense it's maybe more like illustration than art, but at the same time Mr. Warhol's mature career could be seen as art elevated from advertising, and his early career could be seen as advertising elevated through art. And what I mean by that is that he was taking these simple, flat, two-dimensional images of a shoe and depicting it with collage, with abstract mark making, with these vivid primary colors. And in that way we should approach all compositions with that same verve, where we may be painting something that does not mean much to us personally, but if we take that image and use it as a sounding board for our ideas. That's how art is made. Andy Warhol painted the iconic Campbell's tomato soup can because when he was growing up, that was the food he had. He was living in poverty, and he would eat tomato soup with toast or with rice and very meager fare. So when he began meeting with commercial success and critical acclaim in later life, he spent his money on these expensive patent leather shoes, and he worked in those shoes because so many men that would wear those shoes would never do manual labor. And Andy Warhol was showing that, although he was wearing the shoes of a wealthy man, he was still working. And he had a famous saying that you should look rich and think poor. And that's what Andy was doing. He was looking rich. He was wearing the shoes of a rich man, but he was not wearing the rich man's heart. And I think that there's a great lesson in that for all of us. Like Andy Warhol, I come from humble extraction and have eaten my share of Campbell's soup for supper. And though my shoes be of much more modest means than Andy Warhol, I was recently shoegazing and noticed that I'd gotten some bright green sort of chartreuse paint on the laces of my shoes, which I don't believe is going to come off. But we can learn a lot about people from observing their shoes. For example, I don't take great care of my shoes. My shoes tend to be worn out. I don't buy the latest and greatest shoes. And my personality tends to be very introverted, and I sometimes will lack the self-confidence of others, and that's reflected in my choice of shoes. And I've noticed that people who tend to have proud, vainglorious attitudes, hubristic attitudes, will have meticulously clean shoes. And some women will have bright red stiletto heels, and some wayward youths in their youthful exuberance will wear these bright cartoon-colored sneakers. And those are all ways of expressing our personal nature in our apparel. And you can apply these same lessons to artwork. So if you're criticizing or evaluating your own work, consider not the subject. So I may be painting cowboy boots, I may be painting worn out shoes like Van Gogh, but no matter what your subject is, look at the colors you're using, look at the brushwork you're using, the patterns, and whether your lines are more flowing or whether your lines are more rigid. Sometimes there's a nervous quality, which is something that I've had to work to overcome. When I first began painting, there was a lot of broken lines and a lot of difficulty getting that smooth fluidity. I think a lot of men have trouble flowing with the lines. My lines were always broken. They would go here, they'd stop, they'd go down, get in that. Now, I'm trying to have a flowing line, a confident line. And just as our shoes are a representation of our personality, our brushwork and our color palette is a representation of us as an artist, and that is where you'll get your artistic voice. And that's why Andy Warhol is important today. Andy Warhol's shoes are important. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and leave a comment. And if you would like to see more, please consider subscribing to my Patreon, where I have full-length ad-free videos. You can find me on social media at jdouglasartist. Thanks for watching.